So now we will hear from Reverend Raschaad Hoggard, who will be reading passages from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence. Please welcome him to the podium.
My sisters and brothers, all in the struggle for human life and dignity, peace be with you. An excerpt from our universal prophet for justice and for freedom and liberation. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., April the 4th, 1967, just a few feet away at the Riverside Church. Over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silence and to speak from the burning of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path. And at the heart of their concerns, this query has often loomed large and loud. Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix. They say, aren't you hurting the cause of your own people? They ask. And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concern, I am nevertheless greatly saddened, for such questions mean that the inquirers have not really known me, my commitment, or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest that they do not know the world in which they live. In light of such tragic misunderstanding, I deem it a signal of importance to try to state clearly, and I trust concisely, why I believe that the path from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the church in Montgomery, Alabama, where I began my pastorate, leads clearly to this sanctuary tonight. I come to this platform tonight to make a passionate plea about my beloved nation. This speech is not addressed to Hanoi or to the National Liberation Front. It is not addressed to China or to Russia, nor is it an attempt to overlook the ambiguity of the total situation and need for a collective solution to the tragedy of Vietnam. Neither is it an attempt to make North Vietnam or the National Liberation Front a virtue, nor should we overlook the role they must play in the successful resolution of the problem. While they both may have justifiable reasons to be suspicious of the good faith of the United States, life and history give eloquent testimony to the fact that their conflicts are never resolved without trustful give and take on both sides. Tonight, I wish not only to speak for Hanoi and the National Liberation Front, but rather to my fellow Americans. After the French were defeated, it looked as if independence and land reform would come again through the Geneva Agreement. But instead, there came the United States, determined that Hanoi should not unify the temporarily divided nation, and the peasants watched again as we supported one of the most vicious modern dictators, our own chosen men. Per diem. The peasants watched and cringed as Diem ruthlessly rooted out all opposition, landlords, and refused even to discuss reunification with the North. The peasants watched as this was presided over by the United States influence and then by increasing numbers of United States troops who came to help quell the insurgency that Diem's methods had aroused. When Diem was overthrown, they may have been happy, but the long line of military dictators seemed to offer no real change, especially in terms of their need for land and for peace. The only change came from America, as we increased our troop commitments in support of governments which were singularly corrupt, inept, and without popular support. All the while, the people read the leaflets receive their regular promises of peace and democracy and land reform. Now they languish under the bombs and consider us, not their fellow Vietnamese, their real enemy. They move sadly and apathetically as we herd them off the land of their fathers into concentration camps with minimal social needs that are rarely met. They know they must move on or be destroyed by our bombs. So they go, primarily women and children and the aged. They watch as we poison their water, as we kill millions of their crops. They must weep as the bulldozers roar through their areas, preparing to destroy the precious trees. They wander into the hospitals with at least 20 casualties from American free power. So far, we may have killed 1 million of them, mostly children. They wander into towns and see thousands of children homeless, without clothes, running in packs on the streets like animals. They see the children degraded by our soldiers as they beg for food. They see the children selling their sisters to our soldiers, soliciting for their mothers. What do the peasants think as we ally ourselves with the landlords and we refuse to put an action into our many words concerning land reform? What do they think when we test our latest weapons on them, just as the Germans tested our new medicine and new tortures in the concentration camps of Europe? Where are the roots of the independent Vietnam we claim to be building? It is amongst these voiceless ones. Now, there is a little left behind to build on. Save bitterness. Soon, the only solid physical foundations remaining will be the found of our military bases and in the concrete concentration camps we call fortified hamlets. The peasants that we may well wonder if we plan to build our new Vietnam on such grounds as these. Could we blame them for such thoughts? We must speak for them and raise questions they cannot raise. These too are our brothers and our sisters. Perhaps a more difficult but nonetheless necessary task is to speak for those who have been designated as our enemies. What of the National Liberation Front, that strangely anonymous group we call VC or communist? What must they think of the United States of America when they realize that we permitted the repression of cruelty, when helped to bring them into a space of resistance groups in the South? What do they think of our condoning the violence which led to their own taking up of arms? How can they believe in our integrity when now we speak of the aggression from the North, as if they were nothing more than essential to war? How can they trust us when now they charge them with the violence after the murderous reign of Diem, and charge them with the violence we pour into every new weapon of death into their land? Surely, we must understand their feelings, even if we do not condone their actions. Surely, we must see that men we supported pressed them into their violence. Surely, we must see that our own computerized plans of destruction simply dwarf their greatest acts. How do they judge us when our officials know that their membership is less than 25% communist and insist on giving them the blanket name? What must be the thinking when they know that we are aware of their control of major sections of Vietnam, and yet we appear ready to allow national elections in which this highly organized political parallel government will not have a part? Is our nation planning to build on political myth again and then shore it up with the power of new violence? Here is the true meaning of the value of compassion and nonviolence, when it helps us to see enemies' points of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment for ourselves from his view, that we may indeed be the basic weaknesses of our own conditions. If we are mature, we may learn and grow and profit from the wisdom of the brothers we are called in opposition. So too with Hanoi, in the north, where our bombs are in the land and our mines endanger the waterways, we are met by a deep but understandable mistrust. To speak for them to explain this lack of confidence in Western words, and especially their distrust of American intentions now. In Hanoi are the men who led the nation to independence against the Japanese and French, the men who sought membership in the French Commonwealth, and we betrayed by the weakness of Paris and the willfulness of colonial armies. If it was they who led a second struggle against French domination at tremendous cost, then they were persuaded to give up the land they controlled between the 13th and 17th parallel as temporary measures at Geneva. After 1954, they watched us conspire to Diem to prevent elections which they could have surely brought to Ho Chi Minh to power over a united Vietnam, and they realized they had been betrayed again. When asked what do they need to do to not leap and negotiate these things that must be remembered. Somehow this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and brother to the suffering of Vietnam. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak for the poor of America who are paying the double price of smashed hopes at home and death and corruption in Vietnam. I speak as a citizen of the world, for the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as the one who loves America to the leaders of our own nation. The great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop must be ours as well. It is with such activity in mind, in the words of the late John F. Kennedy, that come back to haunt us. 5 years ago, he said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Increasingly, by choice or by accident, this is the role our nation has taken, the role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and the pleasures that come from the immense profits of overseas investments. I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must begin rapidly to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness of justice of many of our past and present policies. On one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will not only lead to an initial act. One day, we must come to see the whole Jericho Road must be transformed so men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed, that they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see an edifice which produces beggars needing reconstruction. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for all embracing an unconditional love for all mankind. This oft misunderstood, this oft misinterpreted concept so readily dismissed by the world as a weak and cowardly force, has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. When I am not speaking of that force which is a just emotional boss. I am speaking of that which forces all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, Jewish belief about ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of St. John. Let us love one another, for love is God. And everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He or she that loveth and not knoweth God, for God is love. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and God's love is perfected in us. Let us hope that this spirit will become the order of the day.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you to all of you. We've come to the end of the night. We have a lot of work to do. Let us not tire. Bombs keep falling on Gaza, and we must each find our answer. Free Palestine. See you later.
I don't see you. Okay. It's blurry, but we got it.
Okay.
Off?
Yep.
Stop
I'm
recording?
gonna wait till it clears out before.